Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Now, we're here to talk about the future, but let me just start with a very quick word about the past, because I've had a long relationship with the Press Complaints Commission, dating back when I was appointed its director in 1996. And I served in that post for nearly 8 years, and after a brief interlude in frontline politics, I joined the Press Standards Board of Finance, the funding body for the PCC, in 2007, and became its chairman in 2009. So I've therefore been closely involved in press regulation for 13 of the last 16 years. And you won't therefore be surprised here that I have a very strong attachment to the PCC, and more importantly to what can be achieved through self-regulation. What has happened to the Commission has been unfair because its achievements, of which there have been many, have been drowned out in the tsunami of phone hacking. First is the achievement of the extraordinarily diverse, diffuse and competitive newspaper and magazine industry actually coming together and supporting a self-regulatory system for 2 decades. And it's also brought with it massive industry investment, over £35 million during that period, a very tangible commitment to self-regulation. Second is the way in which the PCC's complaints handling mechanisms have developed over time into a first-class service. Today, nobody who's in a newsroom under the age of 45 will remember anything other than working with a code of practice. And finally, on the back of that code, standards in certain areas have been raised. It's easy to forget in the maelstrom of phone hacking and other things that in many areas, the treatment of children, the treatment of hospital patients, victims of sexual assault, and above all harassment, newspaper practices have moved light years away from the Wild West days of the 1980s. So in looking to the future, I start from the premise that the industry should take pride in what it's achieved and ensure a legacy from it. While the PCC won't survive in its current form, it's my unshakable belief that self-regulation must. I, for one, remain implacably opposed to the imposition of any statutory control in the system of press regulation, and I include in that concepts of co-regulation, or indeed the new vogue form of statutory underpinning. The press plays a role in society which is different from any other trade or profession. It's there to scrutinise people in positions of power or influence or who work for the state and spend our money. How can it ever be expected to do that if those very same people have any control, however slender, over activities? And that's why the maintenance of self-regulation is so important. In looking to the future, I begin obviously from the main problem of the past, which is the need for a regulatory function, a standards body in a system of regulation, with the power to investigate systemic breaches of the code, or where there is clear evidence of a breakdown of basic ethical or governance functions, the power to enforce the code, and the power to levy effective sanctions, namely fines. Now that is something which is completely new. It will provide the teeth of a new system. That standards function will sit alongside a separate limb of a new body, which will deal with and mediate the more straightforward complaints from members of the public, I hope with the same speed, efficiency and fairness that are the hallmarks of the existing system. But that system, and particularly the standards and compliance arm, will not work without some form of legal power. So we must find the solution by underpinning the new structure and giving it legal force through an innovative system of civil law contracts. This would give the new regulator the equipment it needs to do its work, making it a real regulator for the first time. It would guarantee its funding, and equally importantly, it would set out the role and responsibilities of the new body, for after all, contracts are two-way devices. It would allow us to future-proof the system. For entry to the system need not be limited just to the traditional print media publishers, but to the growing group of digital publishers who have never previously been part of the system. And with the rapid changes in the media landscape, that's going to be of vital importance. Such a development, such a series of developments would, in my view, allow us to square the circle of how you give a private body regulatory powers with the force of law, how you can introduce a real and rigorous standards regime without the need for statute, how you can preserve a swift and cost-free complaints mechanism without introducing the need for lawyers, and how you can do so while preserving the self-regulation that, in my view, is a crucial part of freedom of expression.
I must confess that I find the way that the media talks about the bogeyman of statutory regulation very, very difficult to understand. Of course, the press plays a vital function in society. It should, although often has not, hold power to account. But think of another group which plays an equally vital function, the judiciary. Now, nobody has said we shouldn't have statutory regulation of the judiciary. It's better just to have the Lord Chancellor do it all behind closed doors, because if statute gets involved, then who knows where it will end. Statute can and does provide for proper independence from the executive. What we set out to do was, on the one hand, think of a system which absolutely directly and clearly preserved the independence of the media from any form of state regulation. On the other hand, provided an effective regulator. What we tried to do was to think of a system which would meet the concerns, the legitimate concerns of independence, that would be effective and would provide effective access to justice for complainants. And a crucial feature of this, it seemed to us, was the idea of avoiding compulsion. In other words, not licensing the press, not saying that if you didn't obey the rules, you were struck off, which effectively is what happens with broadcast regulation, but to have a system whereby it was voluntary, but there were incentives for participation. Now, one aspect of the new PCC proposals is that there is no such system of incentives. And so the problem of people who won't join, you can cajole them, you can try and persuade them, but in the end, if they don't join, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, what we propose in our system is to have a system of statutory incentives. People aren't forced to join, but inside is a much nicer place to be than outside. And crucial to that, anybody who wants to bring a complaint against a regulated publisher is forced, first of all, to go through a system of what effectively is alternative dispute resolution. So an independent person looks at the dispute and tells the parties what they think of their respective positions. And experience suggests that perhaps 90% of cases will go away when an independent person looks at it and says, your case is very bad or your case is very good. That can be free to the public in the way that the PCC system is. Certain features of our proposal are similar to the PCC proposal. We propose that there be a contract of membership, and the contract of membership is the contract that gives the disciplinary powers. There is a complaints resolution arm. Members of the public can come to the body free of charge and have their complaints dealt with. One absolutely vital feature that is in our proposal that is not in the PCC proposal is that that complaints procedure would be able, in appropriate cases, to award compensation to individuals, because it would make it more attractive to complainants and make it a real effective alternative to legal proceedings. Phone hacking is not the sole cause of the demise of the PCC. What the Leveson Inquiry has demonstrated is that phone hacking is the tip of the iceberg. There has been a systematic culture of illegality. I mean, what the phone hacking cases have demonstrated is that there was wrongdoing on an industrial scale in the news of the world, and The other newspapers have been very lucky because they didn't have a Glenn Mulcair who noted everything down, but the evidence from, say, Operation Motorman indicates that many other newspapers were involved as well. Now that culture has got to be overcome through a proper and effective regulator.
Some of the most ethical press in the world, perhaps the most ethical press in the world, is the American. And it has no regulator. It has nothing like the PCC. Newspapers, by and large, have ombudsmen, but they make their own ethical requirements. And it seems to work. We have some of the best newspapers in the world in a system which has no regulator whatsoever. Secondly, isn't it the case that it wasn't so much the failure of the regulator or the non-regulator, it was a failure of the law, which didn't intervene when there was a number of prima facie cases where it should have intervened. It was the fault of the police, some of whom seem to have been complicit in the criminality, and it was the fault of the politicians. Were they to do their jobs, would we need a regulator? And finally, an objection that will be familiar to both of you, we have the net. And the net will destroy any system of regulation because it's unregulatable. Why have anything at all?
Newspapers are responsible entities. They know that with their freedoms go hand-in-hand responsibilities. They know also that with the speed with which newspapers and magazines operate and are produced, things from time to time go wrong. Millions of stories a year are replicated across the industry. Of course things go wrong from time to time. And actually then in those circumstances, having an independent body which can sort these things out quickly is good for the newspaper, is good for the reader, and it's a sign of responsibility. Failure of law, I couldn't agree more. The phone hacking saga is not, in my view, was never an issue to do with the failure of self-regulation. It was a failure of law enforcement. And finally, the points you make about the net are well made. What I think is important is that when we are looking at the architecture of any new system of self-regulation, that it has to be flexible enough to bring those responsible publishers, digital publishers, on board who want to come in. The Huffington Post is a good example of somebody who's already signed up to the existing PCC, and I hope will be a part of the new system, and there will be others that do likewise. I would be folly of me or anybody else to say that we will ever be able to produce a system which deals with the internet, but what we can do is try and include those parts of it which lend themselves easily to some form of domestic regulation. I think the system that I've talked about can do that.
The United States, the culture is very, very different, and the economics of US newspapers operate in a very different way. They tended to be single city newspapers. They tended to be depend on classified adverts. They tended to be very profitable, have very large staffs of journalists. The culture simply can't be translated over into the United Kingdom, and it operates very, very differently. Why regulation and not the law? Well, in all spheres, the criminal law is the ultimate standard, but you can't be prosecuting people every 5 minutes. The civil law is also a backstop, but the civil law is expensive, and in this, as in other spheres, regulators are another level down, which need to deal with the day-to-day. They can be of positive benefit, as Guy says, and I think we agreed on this point. They can also serve other functions in terms of education, in terms of improving practices. I mean, if you just look at the Harold Shipman case, for example, the criminal law has got to catch murdering doctors. But what came out of that was a complete revision of the regulatory system for the training and supervision of doctors, so that the regulation and the criminal law work hand in hand. On the third point, people still take the large majority of their information about society, politics, government from the mainstream media. And the mainstream media still play that crucial role in a democracy, which small websites do not. But nevertheless, what we would hope in this system is to encourage online publishers to join, to subscribe to the standards that are laid down in a code, so that users of those systems can have some guarantee that there will be standards of accuracy, corrections will be published, and so on. So, of course, there's always going to be bits of the internet which are beyond regulation, but I don't see myself that as a fundamental objection.